Hey, everyone, and welcome to this deep dive.
Hmm.
Today, we're going to be taking a look at Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal.
Oh yeah, this one is a good one.
Yeah, so this book is all about how to adapt, how to lead and adapt in a world that is increasingly complex.
That's right. And we've talked about complexity in the show before, but McChrystal really brings a unique perspective to it.
He does. And you know what I really appreciate about this book is that he doesn't sort of ease you into the topic. He drops you right into the action.
He does. He starts with a pretty vivid account of a car bombing in Iraq in 2004.
Right, and it's orchestrated by Al-Qaeda in Iraq,
Yeah.
AQI. And it really sets the stage for, the challenges that the U.S. task force is facing in this environment.
And it wasn't just, about this one event. It really signaled a fundamental shift in the whole operating environment. The world was becoming increasingly networked.
Right, and it's interesting because he draws a parallel between the structure of AQI and a modern startup.
Totally. They're both decentralized, agile, operating at lightning speed.
And then you contrast that with the task force, right, which is this massive hierarchical machine.
Right. It's like a giant trying to dance with a swarm of bees.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
I think a lot of businesses and organizations today can relate to that struggle, right?
Yeah, for sure. How do you keep up with the pace of change when the world is moving so fast and everything is so interconnected?
Right. And that kind of brings us to this question of our traditional models of management, the ones that are built for efficiency and control, are they still relevant in this environment?
Right, because in a stable, predictable world, efficiency is king.
Totally.
Yeah.
But McChrystal argues that in a complex environment, you need something more than just efficiency.
You need adaptability. You need resilience.
And he kind of takes us back to the roots of the efficiency obsession. Frederick Winslow Taylor and his scientific management principles.
Taylor, the guy who was obsessed with optimizing everything, even scrambling eggs.
I know.
Yeah.
Right. It's he was trying to find the one best way to do absolutely everything.
And that worked great in the industrial age where things were pretty predictable and standardized.
Right. But in a complex environment where you're constantly facing unexpected challenges, that kind of rigid approach can actually become a liability.
And it's not just about management structures either. Even things like big data, which we often think of as the answer to complexity.
Right. With all that data, you should be able to predict everything, right?
Well, it turns out even big data struggles to predict events in a complex system with so many interconnected variables.
It's like trying to predict the weather, You can have all the data in the world, but there's always going to be that butterfly effect.
Exactly. And that's why McChrystal argues that we need to shift our focus from prediction and control to adaptability and resilience.
So instead of trying to build systems that are robust yet fragile,
yeah,
like the Delta Works in the Netherlands.
Which are amazing feats of engineering, by the way.
Oh, yeah, totally. But they're designed to withstand very specific threats.
Right, so if something unexpected happens, something outside of those parameters,
they could be vulnerable.
Exactly. McChrystal says we need to build systems that can bend without breaking.
Systems that can adapt to unforeseen challenges and bounce back stronger.
And he points to a really interesting example of this shift in thinking with Dutch water management.
Oh, yeah. After those devastating floods, they realized that trying to control everything wasn't working.
So they started to take a more adaptable approach, working with nature instead of against it.
And it's that kind of thinking that we need to bring to our organizations as well.
Right, because in a complex world, the only constant is change.
And the ability to adapt to that change is what's going to determine success or failure.
Absolutely. So how do we build that adaptability into our organizations? How do we create that resilience?
Well, that's where the concept of a team of teams comes in, and that's what we're going to be exploring in the rest of this deep dive.
Sounds good. Let's dive in.
It's really about moving away from that traditional top-down control, that command and control structure.
Right, because in a complex environment, information needs to flow freely.
Yeah, it's not about holding all the knowledge at the top and then disseminating it down.
It's more about creating a shared understanding across the entire organization.
And one of the ways McChrystal did this in the task force was through their daily operations and intelligence briefing.
Oh, yeah, the famous O&I.
Initially, it was a pretty small exclusive meeting, right?
Just a handful of high-ranking officers getting together to discuss the latest intel.
But McChrystal decided to shake things up.
He blew the doors wide open.
They transformed the O&I into this massive open forum.
Anyone from the task force could attend, even people from partner agencies.
It was all about breaking down those information silos.
And McChrystal was a big proponent of radical transparency.
He talks about how they were sharing information to the point where they were almost afraid it was illegal.
But that's what allowed them to develop such a deep shared awareness across the entire organization.
And that shared awareness was critical to their success.
Especially when it came to executing complex operations.
Like the raid on Zarqawi's safe house.
That was a prime example of a team of teams in action.
They weren't just following a rigid plan.
They were adapting on the fly.
Sharing real-time intelligence, making decisions in the moment, adjusting their strategy as new information came in.
And it all worked seamlessly because they had that foundation of trust and shared consciousness.
Everyone was on the same page.
They could anticipate each other's moves, trust each other's judgment, make decisions without needing to constantly check with higher-ups.
And that kind of decentralized decision-making, empowered execution is what allowed them to move so quickly and effectively.
It's a completely different way of operating.
And it's essential for thriving in a complex environment.
Because in a complex environment, you can't predict everything.
You have to be able to adapt.
You have to be able to respond to the unexpected.
And that's what empowered execution enables.
It gives people the freedom to make decisions on the ground.
The freedom to act without waiting for orders from the top.
And that's a really powerful thing.
But it also requires a different kind of leadership.
Right. It's not about being a chess master.
It's more about being a gardener.
Creating the conditions for growth and then trusting the system to flourish.
Setting the stage and then letting the actors take over.
It's about empowering people.
Fostering open communication.
Creating a shared understanding of the mission and goals.
And then trusting your team to do what they do best.
Because when you do that, you unleash the collective intelligence and creativity of the entire organization.
And that's where true adaptability and resilience come from.
Not from rigid structures or top-down control.
But from a shared purpose, a culture of trust, and a willingness to embrace change as a constant.
So think about your own team, your own organization.
Are you creating the conditions for adaptability and resilience?
Are you empowering people to make decisions and take ownership?
These are questions worth reflecting on. Because it's not enough to just talk about adaptability. You have to actually create a culture that supports it.
All right, it has to be baked into the DNA of the organization.
And it's not just about reacting to change. It's about actively seeking it out. Like embracing that discomfort.
Totally. It's about challenging assumptions, experimenting with new approaches, constantly looking for ways to improve.
And it's about creating a safe space for failure, where people feel comfortable taking risks and learning from their mistakes.
Because you're never going to find those breakthrough ideas if you're afraid to fail.
Exactly. And McChrystal talks about how the task force actually fostered this kind of environment. They encouraged people at all levels to share their ideas and perspectives.
They decentralized their intelligence gathering. They empowered people on the ground to collect and share information.
Even people who weren't traditionally in intelligence roles.
Right. It was all about tapping into the collective intelligence of the entire organization.
It was like they turned the entire task force into this giant sensor network.
Constantly gathering and processing data from every corner of the battlefield.
And that gave them a much richer understanding of the situation than they could have ever gotten from a traditional top-down approach.
Because the people closest to the action often have the best insights.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into Team of Teams, what are some of the key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the most important one is that in today's world, adaptability is no longer optional.
It's not just a nice skill to have. It's absolutely essential for success.
And building that adaptability requires a fundamental shift in how we think about leadership teamwork and organizational structure.
We have to move away from those rigid hierarchies.
Embrace more fluid network structures.
Foster a culture of trust, transparency, and empowered execution.
And recognize that the best leaders are often the ones who create the conditions for others to succeed.
The gardeners who nurture a culture of growth, learning, and adaptation.
If you're looking for a practical guide to navigating this new world of complexity, Team of Teams is a fantastic place to start.
It's full of real-world examples and actionable insights that you can apply to your own life and work.
We'll be sure to include a link to the book in the show notes.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more explorations of fascinating and thought-provoking ideas.
Thanks for listening.